What happened?
Man, when you asked me that question, there's so many different experiences in the past 30 years. But probably the worst experience I ever had is I was bonding and rapporting with a customer and set the job up, told her I'm going on my anniversary, told her where I was going on my anniversary. And she's like, oh, I've been there. And so we lived in Reno at the time, and we were going to Northern California to a place called the Benbow Inn. Left the job set up. It was like a Thursday or Friday. Guys tell me it snowed. I'm like, oh, I guess we're on the job. Next thing you know, that night, I'm getting phone calls from some crazy lady. And so it turns out she's calling the Benbow Inn, freaking out why we weren't on her job site because, quote, the snow melted after lunch. Why aren't you back on my site? I had to finally, this is before, texting and all. It's been a minute. But man, I had to tell the front desk, stop letting this person through. She was screaming. It was horrible. I have never had an experience like that since.
Oh man. So never ever tell a customer where exactly you're going, just in case they turn out to be, let's say, unreasonable.
Yeah, that's a euphemism, man. Definitely. You don't know how people are until you really know how they are.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Talk about ruining a weekend trip away. Well, hello and welcome to the DYB podcast. Today's guest is from Austin, Texas, president and founder of OnePoint, PJ Guarino. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve. I'm glad to be here.
My pleasure. Take us back to the beginning. How did you get started?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like John Ray, I got my start in college. And so it was after my freshman year of college at the University of California, Davis. I too saw the little flyer on the bulletin board at the student union. Excuse me. And it just, mentioned, hey, paint. You can earn a living, blah, 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 all this stuff. So me and my roommates, there was three of us, signed up, went to the introductory meeting, and apparently I was the most responsible of the three of us, and so they made me the crew leader, even though not any of us had any experience painting. And that's how I got going in the summer of '91.
Summer of '91
in Sacramento. Yeah.
Okay, so you're in college. What, freshman?
It was before my sophomore year, so that first summer I decided to stay in town, and man, I didn't know a cocking gun from a spackle knife to. And our first houses were. Yeah, man. Our first houses were Victorians in downtown Sacramento. And
here's the crazy part. Fire.
Yeah, man. Well, here's the crazy part about that model. Their way of thinking was the upperclassmen, so juniors, seniors, they're the managers. The lowerclassmen, the freshmen, sophomores, were the workers. So you had no experience leading, no experience. And I'll give you a perfect example. So we're doing a Victorian home. You're supposed to glaze those windows. This guy had us trying to caulk them. Didn't even show us how to caulk. We had caulk all over ourselves. We didn't even know how to turn off. This is before they had the dripless.
Yeah.
Man, I had caulk all over me, everywhere. The windows. It was insane.
Back then, was it oil-based caulk or had it been latex yet?
Good
Remember,
question.
we used oil-based.
It was probably latex.
Yeah. Okay.
It was probably latex back then.
Yeah.
I'm not that old, Steve.
Well, I was out there then. I remember. So you're out there for this summer and this wild experience. Well, then what? So it's just one summer, you go back to school, sophomore. Then what's the next season look like for you, or the next step?
Well, I think like all of us, the reason we're even talking today is we all are entrepreneurs. And I remember calling my dad on the phone. And it turned out, I didn't really know it because my grandfather had died, but it turned out my grandfather, my dad's father, was a painter in Chicago. He died when my dad was 14, so I didn't know the story. So when I called my dad, I'm like, Dad, I like this way too much. I mean, we were in and out 3 days. House looks like garbage. Now it looks beautiful. I'm like, I'm loving it. He's like, just stay in school. You're supposed to be a lawyer. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll do that. And I just kept painting through the summers, and then I left student painters because, $8 an hour even back then was slave wages. So I just started finding my own jobs, and I was the little merry crew leader of my roommates, and then that's how I worked my way through college and getting ready to go to law school.
$8 an hour. I was only getting 450.
I lived in
Back.
California, man. There's a premium
Okay.
to live in
Okay. All
California.
right. This is back up Michigan, so I get okay, that makes sense. So you catch the bug. Then what?
Well, I finished up college early, about three years. I finished up a little bit early, and I was getting ready to go to law school, and I started dating my wife, now my wife, and she was studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, and so I started to study. And make a kind of a long story short, I decided to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I decided not to go to law school. Her brother was a painter in Reno. That's where my father lived and I went to high school. So me and him started our first company together in 1995, and we called it High Sierra Painting and Decorating Incorporated. And that was my first company that I started officially. It was an LLC, and we were licensed and all the fancy things that one starts with the business.
Right on. How did you guys get going? How did you generate leads? In what area did you get into? Was it new construction? How'd you get started and how did you generate your first leads?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Well, Bill already had his own business for about 5 years at that point. He had started off sometime after high school working for a very large commercial painting contractor in Reno, who's still there. Then he went on his own. And so when we joined forces, my only experience was really in residential repaints. He could do pretty much anything. He had painted high rises and he had done other things, but he was focused for the most part on residential repaint. So that's where we started. It was me and him, and we eventually got two helpers. And for the first year or two, that's all we did. And then Reno is like other places. It's close to California, but doesn't have the California weather. And so we started looking for ways to stabilize the ups and downs of the flow of jobs. So being a new business, I started writing letters. I wrote letters to every single subdivision in Reno. And Reno is a retirement community for Northern California. So there was many subdivisions back then and today that were being built. So I started writing letters, and we got our first couple of responses.
So letters of introduction, offers, presentations.
Yeah, no, not that sophisticated. Just basically, I was a college graduate, so I thought I was smart, but definitely didn't know nothing about nothing. So all I just wrote is a letter about who we are, and I would like an opportunity to bid your project. And I had my first taker, and they almost put us out the first 2 years we're in business. Clearly, Richwood Homes. Clearly, they could see the inexperience behind the letter. And they were, turns out, after we did about 4 months' work, they had been filing bankruptcy the whole time. So, yeah. So I sold my first house, and I had to lend like $50,000 to my business because they went bankrupt with all that money. So I learned a very valuable lesson right in the first couple of years of business. But that was our introduction to new construction. That's where we started growing, was in subdivisions back about 1997.
Okay. Well, obviously you survived that. You continued forward. What did you continue in new construction? What did it look like moving forward from there?
Yeah, so we started to grow. So for the end of the 1990s, we had by 35, 40 guys. We thought we were being simple and smart. We weren't. So we were still running our own. Bill and I were still doing our own individual repaint jobs. And we had 35 guys doing subdivisions. And, we thought we were grooving. We were generating, we were probably doing about $1.5 million already at that point after about 3-4 years. Not hard to do at new construction, especially in a booming economy like it was then. And we started dabbling into custom homes. It was just a higher end endeavor. And I absorbed a gentleman who had a custom home company, a custom home painting business that was a friend of my father's, because my dad was in construction in Reno. And so we absorbed his company, and we officially opened a custom home division. So at that point, we started evolving towards custom homes. We were doing subdivisions. We were up to like 50 guys. And then right about the 2000, right in there, we experienced a pretty traumatic shock to our system. I think we did in the month of May of that year, which is usually when you know you're going to hit, $20,000, $30,000 in net profit, not gross, but net. We flatlined. I think we did about 195,000 that month in revenue, and we made like -$5. And that was my first experience in my, mid. I was about 27 years old. That was my first experience with what's the difference between anxiety and a heart attack, and I didn't know until I went to go see the doctor because I thought I was having a heart attack.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
man.
Oh yeah. We've all been there or close to there or have an idea what that feels like. It's part of the entrepreneurial journey, unfortunately.
For sure.
What was going on that caused that?
Yeah. Well, at that point, we had a part-time bookkeeper, and that's it. No business experience other than the fact, again, I went to school, but they don't teach you business in school. And I didn't go to school for business. I went to school to be a lawyer. So I had no business experience. I had a business acumen, a business mind, but zero education business-wise. And so we were living out of QuickBooks. Back then, it was the floppy disk, before they even had the hard disk, with then the CD and then the DVD. But the point was we were adept at using QuickBooks, and I had this gal doing our books, and I remember this was a profound moment in our career. So we flatlined, and she said to us, I saw that coming. I just didn't want to say anything. Yeah, man, she was fired in my head like right then. And Bill and I are very different. We're very complementary to each other. I'm a bit of a, being Latin, I'm very colorful and excitable. And as one profiler once said years later, Bill was my Ritalin because he's very calm. But he wanted to fire her right then because he's like, man, she knew this was coming. She didn't say a word. So, being a little bit business savvy, I'm like, well, we can't just completely fall apart. So we just really had a moment of introspection. I think I even explored maybe becoming a fireman. At that point, I had 4 children under 5. Bill had 3 children. Life was a little serious. We were building our homes next to each other. And so we just started to think, that we're not doing this right. We probably shouldn't be painting. We should probably be treating this as a business. And so we started searching for education. I stumbled on the PDCA, and we went to Vegas, and we heard Michael Gerber speak at the keynote in Vegas, right there at the beginning of the 2000. I think it was about
04, right?
2000. Yeah. What was that?
Yeah. 04, wasn't it?
Well, I'm bad with dates.
That's okay.
Whatever it was right about then where we had this epiphany. We had already started talking about, we had kind of had the come to moment between the two of us. And we're like, are we going to focus and do this or not? And so we already started talking about systems and processes, and we started having all these thoughts. And then we heard Gerber, and I read his book. In fact, I just pulled the same book out. I have the same copy I've read about 15 times. I'm giving it to a contractor friend of mine later today. But when we heard Gerber, it was like the proverbial light bulb, but it was more like stadium lights. It was just like, and so we bought out of the contracts and subdivisions. It cost me $40,000 to get out of my contracts. They certainly wanted to help us with that, so they gladly took our money. And we doubled down on custom homes. We were evolving into new construction and commercial. And I hired a young friend of mine away from another contractor, and we started building our first estimating program, him and I. Production rates, I don't know if you know Irv Chasen back in the day. He was in PDCA PDCA. And Irv had theories, in his premise in his book was how to recoup overhead and overhead and profit as a multiplier of labor. So we built an entire Excel spreadsheet based on that. And so we got rid of the track work, kept the repaint, kept the custom home. We're growing into new construction and commercial, and we raised our prices because now we knew our numbers. Prior to that, it was all square footage. It was like, ooh, custom home, $5 a square foot, add some wood windows. Okay, add $2,000. And it was, dude, no wonder we surprised we go out of business. But we raised our prices, and starting in about 2001, our revenue, it wasn't a miracle. I didn't think it was a miracle, but man, it sure seems like in retrospect, all of a sudden our revenue went up, our net profit went through the roof. And that was the beginning of systemizing the business. And we really focused the next couple of years on that. And that we really took off in residential repaint stays stable, but new construction, custom and commercial, and then commercial repaint became huge revenue streams for us. And we kept these silos and trained our team, our staff, to be adept. And we had different crews to do different types of painting. So we didn't niche ourselves. We just tried to be profitable in each revenue stream. And we started painting the skyline of Reno with high rises because that was Bill's forte. And it just started taking off from there. I think by 2003, we're at about 3 million.
3 million, 2003.
Yeah, by 4 or 5, we're about 5 million, and hired a general manager, and we just kept growing from there.
Okay. 5 million, and things are moving right along, systems in place. You guys got out of the field. That was key, right? And stayed out of the field so that you could work
2000,
on the business, to quote Gerber.
For sure. So by 2005, I phased Bill out of the business. I took over completely as CEO, and we started a business overseas. And we started a second business doing investments. So we were buying and flipping and improving properties. That was kind of our long game. So Bill handled those two businesses. I was CEO of the painting. We brought in a general manager. And at that point, we rebranded in the early 2000s to HSP Painting because we started expanding into California, Idaho. We had an office in Idaho. We did projects in Denver, Southern California. And at that point, by 2004, about 100 employees, W-2, and doing over 5 million. And I was working 2.5, 3 days a week because we had everything really systemized, and it was great.
That's awesome. So just crushing it and on a rocket, to just next level. And then what?
Well, I think most of us remember a time called the Great Recession. Here in Texas, they refused to acknowledge it because it didn't really affect them, which is why I ended up here. But the reality is, in some parts of the country, I know you and I have talked about this, it was pretty severe. And Reno being a smaller community that is real dependent upon California for tourism, for real estate, people downsizing, the smaller the community, the more isolated it is. The more insulated it is, the higher the highs, the lower the lows. So in 2008, things started, of course, getting crazy in the economy. We had probably about 8 contracts that were worth millions of dollars. So, for example, we were working up in Truckee and Lake Tahoe. We would literally van up about 15 employees a day up there. We had contracts with a company called East West that was building retirement or vacation condos for wealthy people. And that contract carried us through to 2010. That was probably a $2 million contract. We were doing a high rise in downtown Reno where they stripped down the Reno Hilton and was rebuilding it as luxury condos right in downtown. And that was the biggest individual contract we had ever signed at that point, about 1.8 million just for the painting. And so we rode those contracts. 2008, 2009, we're still profitable. 2010, we were winding up the contracts, and starting at the beginning of 10 to the middle of 10, we went from over 5 million revenue. We were just hemorrhaging, and the revenue dropped to like $1 million. And when you have $50,000 a week in payroll and 14 people in management, it's really easy to build. It's really difficult to disassemble your company.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we were at the middle of 2010. I realized I got to do something. This is it's not going to work.
Oh yeah. What did you do?
Well, my bookkeeping service, a gal that's to this day works with me, she's my accountant now. Mm-hmm. We started exploring different parts of the country. So we built a spreadsheet, built criteria, was looking at Southern California because it's close. I was licensed in both states. It would be a easier move with our family being in California and Nevada, but still ridiculously expensive, and the economy was bad. We looked at Phoenix. It was affected really bad in the economy as well. I was concerned with the extreme weather. And then we just landed on Texas. A friend said, you should check out Fort Worth, and which is by Dallas, part of the DFW metro. It's too cold there for me. And so we landed on Austin in 2010. I came and visited San Antonio and Austin. My wife cried when she saw San Antonio. She just didn't like it. We drove into Austin the next day, went to the west side, and the beginning of the hill country, which looks like California with oak trees and large houses. And my wife's like, I'm good. And so in November of 2010, we drove a borrowed vehicle because we lost everything. Filing bankruptcy, we lost every vehicle. Funny story. I was awarded one of my work trucks. We had like 15 trucks and we kept selling them. And then the bankruptcy, they took them. They let me have one truck. I'm like, sweet, pickup truck. I can start painting again. And the last week before we left Reno, my insurance company who had my bond, they took that truck. It was like $7. It was out of spite. It was
Oh,
ridiculous. So I had a vehicle a relative gave us, and we drove. This is a true story. We drove 4 kids, 2 dogs, 4 puppies, 4 pink suitcases to the top of the Navigator, and we drove to Texas. And after Thanksgiving Day, that weekend, we drove to Texas and came to Austin.
wow.
And the movie truck came after that. So yeah, buddy,
Whew.
4 kids, man.
My story. I can relate, and it's huge. It's big, but I have a feeling, as it did for me, did for you too. It just took that desire that we have to succeed and just flamed it even more. Right?
Yeah.
You're like, I've
I
got to
mean, I
figure this.
definitely,
Hmm.
no, I definitely felt a sense of urgency and responsibility. But
Hmm.
I have to say, for me, it was very difficult to restart HSB painting here. Um, After having a business where you worked 2.5 days a week, was working completely on the business, which is when you're an entrepreneur is the ultimate. Um, Not even having to do, I didn't even sign paychecks. So to
Hmm.
now be a company of one, I just started doing what I did the first time. I started knocking on doors and doing flyers and just
Hmm.
started. And the thrill wasn't nearly as thrilling as it had been 18 years prior to that. And the pressure was really severe because I had 4 kids, what were the kids? They were 15, 14, and 2 10-year-old twins. And my wife had never worked. So now I got all these kids looking at me. And my wife, they're like, okay, so what's the plan? I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to paint some houses, I guess. So it was a little stressful, but yeah,
Yeah.
it did
So
character building.
did you get out there yourself? I did. Like after I went bankrupt and lost everything after the Great Recession and went down to Florida, I had to get back in the trenches, and I was literally pressure washing homes myself, dirt all over, thinking, my goodness, a few years ago this was not the case,
Yeah.
and just like what a humbling, humbling experience that was. What did you do to get started again?
Well, that's it was similar to that. So first of all, we came to Texas because of the weather and the milder winters, no taxes, um, and so we were thrilled. We arrived here at the beginning of December. It was 80 degrees, and then we get some weird weather in the winter, but it's still 70. You're still painting, and I tried it a little different. I was able to borrow some money from some of my family members. They were a little bit less affected by the economy, just being further along in life. So I tried to build the business by partnering with a friend of mine that I had met here, and letting him be the labor component and me just focus on the top half of the business. And it was a good working relationship because he had himself and he was building the crew and I was helping him do that. I was working with David Chisholm. So there's the connectivity to you. He eventually introduced me to you. Um, and I just started marketing and just trying to get out there and do sales and get the work and teach my friend how to run his crew so that, even though it's a subcontractor relationship, it was symbiotic where I'd get the work, he'd get the work. And that's how we started. And it, started moving along.
Okay. So, what year is this?
That was the beginning of 2011. We had got to
2011.
Texas,
Mhm.
beginning of December of 10. This was
Mhm.
now, February, kind of starting to get going,
Okay. So
knocking on
11.
doors.
Yeah. What does it look like? 2012, 13, 14,
Yeah, great
15.
question. I had a situation with my son, and I ended up shutting down HSB Painting. I mothballed it. Didn't close the LLC. I just made it dormant. I went to go work for a friend who had a locksmith company, of all things. And he was a personal friend, and he had grown that locksmith company to about $2 million in about 6 cities. And I was under so much stress now that my oldest was having issues and causing stress in the family. He's like, look, what do you want to leave your own company? What do you want? And I laid it out: ownership, flexible schedule, work from home part of the time, which of course back in 2012, that was not really a common thing. And he agreed to all that. So I went to go work for Mr. Reiki Locksmith. And that was 2012. And it was nothing that he said it was going to be. But
How do you mean?
well, I had to work in an office.
Oh,
I'm punching a clock. I've never punched a clock my entire life. And recently we did another profile similar to this. We did one called Wealth Dynamics. And when you read my profile, which is probably similar to many entrepreneurs, one of the don'ts it says is don't put them in an office. Don't make them, that's like, which exactly what it was, man. It was like,
yeah.
am I in prison? I mean, every morning I was like just depressed. It was horrible. And he didn't give me ownership. I did have my Fridays off so I could continue in my personal endeavors and my ministry, but it was very stressful for about a year and a half, for sure.
Okay. So a year and a half, and then what?
Well, then he hired another gentleman from corporate America. He had some wisdom there, and so I started connecting with him. We started really expanding the business nationwide, and so I decided, well, he's not going to give me ownership. I'm like, well, I'll just start another company and run it parallel. So I started a cleaning business, and that was the beginning of my co-marketing multiple companies. And so with the locksmith business, we expanded it to, at that point, we're about 8 million. And so I had taken us to Florida, about 3 cities in Florida, Atlanta, the Carolinas. And so what I did is I started building cleaning crews, and I worked as I was negotiating the locksmithing contracts. I'd say, well, how about cleaning? And we were working with all the big SFRs like Invitation Homes, Progress, American Homes for Rent. These guys have to this day 500,000 homes easily in their portfolio. They bought it out of the recession. So I started building cleaning crews in Las Vegas, in Reno, all over Texas, and in Florida. So I was building my cleaning business, HSP Cleaning, at the same time as running Mr. Reiki. So by then I was the COO of the company. And so I'm running the two. And finally, I'm just like, hey, Ken, you want a part of this? Do you want to make this a formal arrangement? I have a whole plan on how to do this. And so he bought into the cleaning business. We rebranded it Mr. Ready Clean to tie the Mr. name together, which I absolutely abhorred. But I'd rather win than have a name. Yeah. And then we started building two other franchise modeled national businesses, a pest control company, a garage door business, and another painting business, which I brought Bill into the picture. So I was building all these entities and running off of our platform on a national basis. And I did it about for 8 or 9 years.
Wow. Okay. Then what?
Well, my friend borrowed like $2 million, unbeknownst to me, from low, how would I say that? High interest, short return. So he borrowed against the receivables of a locksmithing company. Doing $10 million a year, you could factor your receivables. And so he was getting these high interest, short-term loans, and it just started suffocating the business. And so
hard money.
Yeah, man. And instead of focusing on growing these ancillary companies that I was ownership in, I'm trying to save the core company. And once the lender started filing UCC liens against the loans, all the national companies, the home warranty companies, the SFRs, their lawyers were like, you're done. And so our revenue we just started tanking. And that was 2018 into 2019. So the end of 2019, so November 2019, it was just flatline. And him and I sat down one day and he's like, there's nothing left to pay anybody. You're the highest salary. We co-own all these other businesses, but I can't pay you through Mr. Reiki anymore, which was my primary salary. And I'm like, I had already known it was coming. I had felt metaphorically, I had thought to myself, I felt like I was on the Titanic. I had seen the movie, and I felt like I was chained to the deck of the Titanic, knowing exactly what was going to happen. So I just waited for that moment, and he's like, I just stood up, shook his hand. He's like, you're not mad? And I'm like, no, I'm just going to keep my computer and some other technology, and I'll keep ownership in those companies, and I'll see you later. And I walked out, and Went home and told my wife, let's sell the house. I'm starting over again. Here's number two. Here we go. And that was the end of 2018.
2018. So when you told Pessy, your wife, what was her response?
She knew what was going on. Ancillary. I don't include my wife in my business too much just because she has her hands full with the kids. But at that point, the two older kids were out of the house. The twins had just gone. They had turned 18. They had just gone on a trip to Thailand for a month by themselves with a friend. That was a big thing. We didn't want to tell them. It was November. And I just told my wife, look, it is what it is. So we're going to sell our house. We have equity in it. And we're going to downsize, and I'll figure out what to do next. And obviously, being, the beginning to middle of November, you're not going to find a job before the first of the year. No one's hiring. And so we just started preparing the house to sell, and just kind of wrote it out, filed unemployment. So fortunately, I had some W-2 income, so I could actually have a unemployment check, and just kind of stuck it out. So,
but you had her support.
Absolutely. I mean, she trusted me that I worked us through I'd always handled stuff. I had a plan. I didn't know what it was going to be. And my faith in Jehovah, I knew that he'd help me provide for my family. I didn't have a lot of needs. We've never had a lot materially. We kept it simple. Once we lost everything in Reno, you keep your life simple, knowing that it could happen again. And it did. And so in February of 19, so that was the end of 18, February of 19, I didn't want to apply for jobs in the C-suite, they say, CEO, COO, CFO. That's my experience owning my own businesses and then with Mr. Riki. But if I applied for those type of jobs, I'd be working 70, 80 hours a week. And I didn't want that because of my family, what's important to me, my faith. And so somebody was advertising, looking for someone to run their painting franchise. And so in February of 2019, I started managing. I interviewed a gentleman who was in tech. He had been sold a lie. The lie was you can buy a franchise and just turn the key and outspits money like an ATM. Well, he had a manager and an office manager, field manager, office manager, general manager, I guess he called him, paying about $100,000 in salaries. And they were doing like $15,000 a month in revenue. So he interviews me. He sees my experience. Of course, he wants to know why the heck at 30, at that point I was 40 something. Why are you in your situation? And then I wanted to hear him why and so we talked, and I'm basically like, look, this is not math. This is not rocket science. It's just math. Fire the two of them, hire me, give me 75% of their salary, and you and I can work on a commission model. And so I took over the business in February. And by the summer, I had it up to $60,000, $70,000 a month in revenue. And we started negotiating ownership at that point because he said, he comes from tech. He was an employee. So he thought in terms of sales, bonuses, and commissions. And he would give me bonuses. And I would be like, man, that's nice. And he's like, you don't seem excited. I'm like, I don't need dollar signs, man. I need percentages. He's like, what's percentages? I said, man, I've never worked for anybody in my life. I need ownership. If you want me to fully invest myself and my efforts, I need to be an owner, because if not, I'm eventually going to go start my own thing again. It's just biding my time. So we started negotiating through the summer into September of 19, and he was going to give me 50% ownership in his franchise. I was going to take some equity from the sale of the house I sold, and we were going to go buy out the Austin franchise because he too was in tech and he too was floundering, because you can't run a company, even if it's a franchise, from 5 to 9 o'clock at night. It's just, you're beholden to the person you have. And he too is just not doing well. And that was the 360 painting model. They went after people in their 40s and approached them with this opportunity. And I know you're familiar with some of these things, just approaching you with the DYB system. So these guys were all floundering. And so we were going to buy them out. And that was September of 2019 when we were supposed to have our meeting on a Friday and talk about ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point, many of them came to us for help and guidance, and even legal help to get out of what they're in, without going into details. But yeah, it was a bad situation.
It is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they sell them a bill of goods for sure.
Yeah, it's
So,
unfortunate.
so
Go
I
ahead.
had gone to visit my brother and sister-in-law in San Francisco, or excuse me, in New York, and that was the end of September. Yeah, about middle of September of 2019. And I did what I do as an owner, right? I mean, I wasn't an owner yet, but I still worked like one, and I was working over the 4-day weekend, closing jobs, setting things up. Come back, midnight on Monday. I'm out in the field. Get up. I'm out getting ready to start some jobs at 5 a.m. in the morning the next day, and he calls me up, and he's mad, and I'm thinking, I'm on fire. I'm excited, right? I'm closing this month out of September, ramming some jobs in, and he's ticked that I didn't update some spreadsheet that the franchise told him he needed to have. I'm like, well, I agree with you, but would you rather me get these jobs done and then fill out the spreadsheet later, or do you want me to not do the jobs and put numbers into your spreadsheet? I'm like, if you're a business person, I kind of would rather have money in hand than a number on a page. And he just went off on me. I mean, just literally. And in all the years Bill and I were in business together, 18 years, even in the situation with Ken, with the Mr. Reiki thing, there was never a time I had ever myself raised my voice or they raised their voice. And I literally, so that was Tuesday. Wednesday, that day, Tuesday, I literally pulled over after he yelled at me. I made 2 phone calls. Well, at first I prayed, then I called my wife, then I called my now accountant, who was my old bookkeeper. And I had HSP open again that day. I felt bad. I was going to wait till the Friday when we were going to consummate this new ownership. I felt bad. Uh, so that Wednesday, I said, "Hey, come meet me at Starbucks." And I told him I'm done. And he was floored. And I'm like, man, I was a much different person before I became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So this is the easier way for you and me to not have a bigger problem with your temper. And I'm like, I can't do this. And I even said to him, your marriage is falling apart, because it was. He had a blended family, second marriage. Uh, Ironically, they had also bought a cleaning franchise. And that was like his and hers. So instead of matching cars, she got a cleaning franchise, he got a painting franchise. And their marriage, you could just see it. It was all falling apart. I'm like, bro, I'd shut it down, do what you got to do, save your marriage. And it was just the kind of guy he was. He was very ambitious. And he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, whether I do or I don't, I'm not going to be a part of this. And so that was October of 2019. HSP 3.0
Yeah.
got going, and
Right on.
we started growing. It started out the gate good, and in that fall, or excuse me, in January of 2020, I opened up my second business, OnePoint Contractors Group, to build a vendor group, like a referral alliance, so I could generate work for painting. And then the pandemic started.
Yeah.
So, by then my daughter was working for me part time as doing marketing. David Chisholm was training her. She had worked for me in the other endeavors, doing learning, social media marketing and stuff, but very limited at the time. And my son-in-law, she was engaged to this young man. He just had that point, had started just driving along with me, seeing how could I fit him into my organization somehow. And we were in Mexico for a couple weeks in January, and he handled some of the estimates while I was gone. And at that time, so this is the beginning of HSP 3.0. So I was heavy into custom homes because I had just negotiated with a couple builders do custom homes. And so he handled the repaints, I was handling custom homes, and then the pandemic hit. And as I'm sure it was for everyone that's perhaps listening, that is universal. That was a universal experience. So second major traumatic financial event, of course, in my life after the Great Recession, probably for everyone else our age. And we just wrote it out with that new construction because, fortunately, even though Austin is very liberal and they were trying to shut everything down, there was a battle between the judges in the city and the judges in the counties, which seemed to control this. And I'm not into politics, I don't quite understand it. But where I was doing my work was around the lake, and that was technically outside of the county of Austin. So they kept it going, and that kept my money moving.
Mm.
And we just had to ride it out, man.
Mm.
It was, we were doing $60,000-$70,000 a month in revenue, and all of a sudden, it's in half. And because I use subcontract labor, I wasn't eligible for. I had friends getting $300,000, in idle loans and PPP loans, and I was only getting 15 or 20, and I'm like, holy cow, here we go again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No doubt.
and that's how I came to you. right? That was April of whatever year that was. David Chisholm recommended you, and I interviewed you. It was towards the past the middle of the pandemic. I had gone down to the coast just to get away. My stepfather was dying, and I interviewed you, and I'm like, I told my wife, I'm gonna find the money. I'm like, he has a system, and it's interesting, see, with all this experience that I've been droning on about, I was still very inexperienced when it comes to residential repaints because even at the peak in Reno, we never were beyond two crews. We never spent a lot of money. We were a construction and a business to business relationship based business, which is really my strength as an owner. And what I had parlayed in the time I wasn't doing painting was B2B and high level negotiations and as owners. None of that translates into getting in front of a homeowner. So of course I'm throwing money at the residential stuff as we're coming out of the pandemic, trying to get work because that was Mike's focus point, and I'm doing Home Advisor and I'm doing pay per click, and that's how we got to DYB.
Mm. Um, well, very glad you did, and I'm grateful for David for referring you. So you joined UIB, and then what?
Well, it was really my twist. You were very kind to put me in the mastermind group with people um, that on paper were far ahead of me, but I think you and I had talked and you realized I could contribute as a business owner, even though my revenue wasn't at the level of some of the people in the group. John Peak was in the group. He and I had been in On Target and Summit, 20 years before, so I had a relationship with him. His nephew was in the group, Seth, of course, who to this day is just blowing it up, and DYB, got him on his path. But I could contribute, but of course I was much further behind in the implementation of the DYB system. And so, like I do with everything, if I'm gonna do something, do 110. So I watched every single module and took notes on every single module in your DYB cafe. And then I told my daughter and my son-in-law which ones they needed to watch. And we started building your system you had recommended Monday. So we started building the DYB system into Monday so I could teach these young people how to implement what your system was.
Mm. Indeed. And I remember too, building that all out, and I thought, my goodness, it's incredible, to see somebody actually go through each one and just take action, take notes, take actions, and delegate and teach it to the others. I was blown away watching you go through that process, because in the back end we can see who's went through what module and who's completed what, and it's very rare. In fact, it's rare that most like 80% don't go through any of them.
Yeah.
The Pareto principle kicks in, and so you're at the top of that Pareto principle, and we were really impressed. So you rolling it out, you're in mastermind, and we're getting rolling, and you're teaching the team, you're building a team, you're building out your tech stack, and you're getting things going as you're implementing the system. Then what?
Well, when I had joined DYB, I had stopped doing custom homes. I had realized the model didn't fit my long-term plan. That would have been a me business, that portion, because I could not teach Mike how to bid and supervise custom home. I had been doing it for 25 years, and I'm very good at running custom home work. But between it being all about me and using subs, it was just not profitable. So I had shut that down. Now we're completely reliant on the residential repaint coming out of the pandemic. So I told my wife, look, some of the money we made selling the house. Yes, I didn't buy into the franchise with that gentleman with 360, but I said, we're going to need to live on this money because I'm going to cash burn the business. Now, she didn't really understand what that meant. And I said, well, if you look at some of these big companies like Tesla at the time and some other ones, there's a calculated loss of money to achieve a long-term goal. And so I invested in my mind in my daughter and her husband to teach them the DYB system and keep myself in a working on the business role instead of taking on a role that would mitigate the need for them. But I needed to get back to where I was when I had HSP and I was not working full time, because my long-term goals, as I've articulated to you from the very minute we met, was stable income, residual income, because I had no retirement. I lost everything, and time, because I'm a minister and I wanted to have more time to be in my ministry with my wife and family. So those were my driving factors of what motivated me. And I mean, if you were looking at if you had some metrics on what I was doing, you would have saw I was watching DYB modules till like 2 in the morning every day. And I wanted to get it done in like 2 weeks. And funny that I just met April for the first time in person, 2 weeks ago when I came through Tennessee. But I feel like I've known her more than almost anybody because she's primarily the one doing your modules and very, it's her. Um, so we just kept working at implementing it. We implemented your tech stack almost immediately. I had this conversation yesterday with a gentleman who does a lot of work with me as a general contractor. And I told him all the things I used to do. 7 things. One, set up the customer, build the file, QuickBooks, dun, dun, dun. And I said, yeah, we have this company called DYB Virtual, and they zapped. He didn't understand what zapping was. So I had to explain to him the difference between zapping and API. And I'm like, this is what we've done. You implement it once, and it just dominoes your tech stack. And they're like, what's a tech stack? Okay, so I had to explain that to them. And this is the one I have the book, the E-Myth book
Okay.
out for him. And so I literally, this is yesterday at coffee, said, Steve, with his wife April, who runs DYB Virtual, made our tech into this system. And he linked everything with Zapier. And so all of our programs, our primary programs, of course, we're a Google-based platform, a Google workspace, and we ride or die with that now. I abandoned Outlook a number of years ago, and you were the nail in that coffin. And of course, Monday, which was, we had used Asana in the past, so my daughter was adept at that. And then Pipedrive, we just switched from Pipeline to Pipedrive in the last couple months. We just switched back to Paint Scout. And then, of course, we've always used QuickBooks Online, so QBO. So you all helped us with MailChimp and a spread. I mean, now the whole thing just links with one action, saved me an hour per job. So just those type of things we just were implementing and slowly building and waiting for the revenue to hit. Teaching someone in their mid-20s how to do estimating and sales when they've never done sales or estimating or even paint was a slow burn. And you and I had many conversations about the timeline on that and just how long could I afford to not be profitable. And that was interesting.
It was. What you're doing is unique and risky, but you did it, and it's paying off.
Yeah. Mike turned the corner. I think what helped was I actually got him doing a lot of things, of course, with the DYB system, but then I got him with Gitmer. And we did like a 2-month program with them. We endured with Jeffrey and his wife, great people. But we got as much out of it as we needed. Like you said, don't read more chapters in a book than you need to. We stayed with Gitmer as long as we needed. And I think it gave Mike just the little boost he needed. And the end of last year, so the end of 22, he started hitting his numbers. And then starting January, he's exceeded his numbers, not just in sales, but the revenue, because he's a project manager. So he's responsible for the sales and production. And he was hitting his margins. So the few years prior, there would be times we hit the numbers, both revenue and sales, but then our gross profit target of 45 would dip to 38, 37. So we weren't profitable. We're breaking even. I wasn't drawing full salary. I mitigated that with my other company. So I was living, but we weren't truly profitable. But when he hit the numbers, the end of this past year, and now every month over month, he's now between 45 and 50% gross profit, and his numbers, he's selling in the low 100,000s. We're grooving now. And so we're in growth mode. So,
and well done, Mike. Hopefully you're listening or watching this.
He's going to be for sure.
So, turn the corner. We hit, the compound effect, inflection point, breakthrough, depending on which analogy or book we come through. And things are going great. This was HSP 3.0. However, just made a little shift there, right?
Yeah. So once the painting business started hitting its numbers, I my strength and my weakness is my energy. And when 2 years of not being profitable starts to wear on you, even though you have a plan, and I don't know if you can see it behind me. I have things written on the wall on my whiteboards that I did the whiteboard paint. And one of them is the slight edge. I even have something called Seth's Standard. I think I told Seth that, where I basically confined his success to a metric of this many leads, this many estimates, yields this much per job, this much revenue. And I said, that's our target. So it's Seth's standards, even on our scoreboard. So kudos to you, Seth. And then the slight edge. And I just kept going, dude, I'm like, I'm waiting for the massive. I get the small, consistent decisions plus time equals massive results. And I'm like, Steve, I'm waiting, man. When's the results? And it was tough because the strength of the model is I had my son-in-law and my daughter working for me. So I knew I had really loyal, stable people. I gave them on paper a percent ownership. And I was doing my consulting with my other business. So I had flipped consulting into the OnePoint Contractors Group, the vendor group, which was hard to build during a pandemic. So I just used it as a vehicle to do consulting, and I was living off that money. And so when Mike started hitting his numbers earlier this year, now I could sit back and go, okay, let's get back to my larger term plans. And so in the last 3 months, we basically have reinvented the whole concept. And so we approached how to conceptually combine the two companies. And so instead of being HSP Painting and OnePoint Contractors Group, and by then we were doing project management for realtors, and we realized our niche were realtors with OnePoint Contractors Group, and it's the largest customer base for HSP. So we said, okay, I hired a consultant, and we conceptualized how do we create a messaging that resonates clearly with realtors. And so instead of, we kind of borrowed from Facebook with Meta and Google with Alphabet, and we said, okay, let's rename the parent company OnePoint, and then conceptually everything fall beneath it in divisions. So we rebranded the painting OnePoint Painting Company, and then we separated divisions from OnePoint Contractors Group. So now we have OnePoint Property Solutions, which is a project management endeavor with realtors, and inevitably it always hires the painting because that's the primary thing. So that's what we've been working on last 3 months. We are 98% done with the rebrand. In fact, I think Mike with ClickWiz, either today or Monday, will flip the URL on the HSP website to onepointpaintingcompany.com. So now we'll be completely converted. And now the month of June, we're in June. By the beginning of July, I will have merged the entities behind the scenes. Now we're merging. So instead of 2 payrolls, 2 insurances, now it'll all be one. And we can already see Mike's still doing 100,000 a year or a month in sales for HSP. Now he's doing 100,000 in sales for the OnePoint Property Solutions piece. So now the massive results are there, and we are, conceptually, I brought on my nephew who's production from Mike, and then we brought on another project manager who's a general contractor to handle the property. So now we're creating bandwidth and margin. We added a friend of mine who works for Apple. He wanted to be a part of the team, so he works 10 hours a week, and all he does is go find business. And he's like, I love Apple. He's like, but I'd rather come work for you when you can afford to hire me away. He's like, for now, I'll give you 10 hours and I will build my position. I'm like, well, I'm not going to pay you your salary, but I can give you a little something.
Yeah.
That's where we are. And my other daughter joined the team. She's a designer. So now we have a design division. We just had an agreement to terms yesterday with the biggest Compass agent in Texas. He will offer our design services, so OnePoint design services, on every one of his. Last year, he did 416 transactions as a team. They will now have us as their marketing or their design offering. And then OnePoint, we're aligning with OnePoint so that we handle all of his, whatever they need to do to sell a house or buy a house. We're aligning ourselves, and we're in the middle of negotiating that. That'll be worth a couple $1 million a year easily.
Right on. Okay. What is your vision?
My vision is I've literally come full circle to back to where I was in the middle of 2005 when I was working, a couple days a week and everything is systemized. I'm not quite to the couple days a week because there's been so much with the rebrand, but I'm fully 100% out of the day to day. I even got the few checks we write. Emilia does that, my daughter. So we're fully systemized. And you asked me as we're preparing for this, the contribution of DYB and also some of the different education pieces. that contributed to that. And I would attribute both to DYB and the books I've read, helping me revise my vision from, the early 2000s when I was much younger to now, and incorporating my experience when I stepped away for 8 years and was building those national concepts. I've kind of wrapped them all into this OnePoint, and pretty excited to see just exactly how far it's going to go.
Right on. Fantastic, PJ. You've done an amazing job, you and your team. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story before we roll out today. Is there a question I should have asked or a final point that you would like to make?
Well, I don't think there's a question that you could have asked, but I will make a point, and that is I don't read anywhere near to the level you do. However, the principle of educating ourselves and always learning in order to always be growing, I think, is critical to anyone who wants to have a successful business, whether it's paint or project management or locksmithing or a bakery. If you want to go to the E-Myth and use his little example of a bakery, we're all just a business that's selling a product or a service. In the case, our product is a service. But business principles are universal. And so if we're not growing as business people, then we're not growing in our business, and therefore we're doomed to fail. And so that's one thing. You rekindled my zeal for that, being a part of DYB. And the books that you've had me read, both Endless Referrals, we just signed an agreement with Endless Referrals for the sales team to do a couple months with him. And I just talked and Bob actually said hi, by the way. I talked to Bob
Awesome.
2 days ago. I was blown away when he called. He's like, "Do you know who I am?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know your voice very well, Bob." And it was cool. But the Slight Edge, and now a big publication that's really helping me is the Millionaire Master Plan by Roger Hamilton, and that is a new thing for me that takes the disc kind of to a different level. But it's the zeal for education, I think, that I've taken, and I would leave ones with, which I get from you, but also I believe in it for myself. But I think that's the critical piece to be successful.
Fantastic. Very good. Thank you. If somebody wanted to follow up, what's the best way that they should contact you?
Oh yeah, email is the best. PJ@onepointalliance.com. And you can email me and we can do a Zoom call. I love to help people. That's why I'm giving the E-Myth to that contractor later today. The E-Myth, the Checklist Manifesto, and the Starbucks Experience, I told you when we met, those were the fundamental. Every team I've ever built has had to read those. Those are the backbone, and to this day are the backbone of what I do. But all the other books you've had me read has fleshed out and given so much color to this skeleton that I had, the outline. So yeah, call me. I have no problem.
To quote my mentor, Bob Berg, you are on your way to greatness, my friend.
Yes. I just want to be on my way to just maintaining a stable income.
There you go.
Greatness is relative, man, after what I've been through. And I know you share the same thing. It's just about being with our family and having time for more important things. It's not a monetary thing. So
right on, which is what greatness looks like in my eyes. So fantastic.
Amen.
Thank you again, PJ, for coming on. It's an honor and pleasure to know and to work with you, and appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. All right. Bye-bye.